She scrubbed the floors while others closed million-dollar deals. No one looked at her twice until a call came through, urgent and foreign, with no one else around to answer. Against all odds, she picked it up. That decision would expose lies, racial bias, and the hidden power of someone everyone underestimated. What followed wasn't just about saving a business. It was about shattering stereotypes in the most unexpected way. How could a woman dismissed as just a cleaner become the reason a billionaire kept everything? The night always felt longer when the world had already gone home. For most, the towering glass building downtown was a place of power, where billion-dollar contracts were signed, where suits and ties decided the future. But for her, it was simply a place of work. Long after the executives left, when the lights dimmed and the echo of footsteps faded, she arrived. A black woman in her late 30s, carrying a bucket, gloves, and a quiet determination, she entered spaces most people never noticed. Her name was Amara. To the few who even bothered to glance, at her badge she was just another cleaner, a face blurred by routine. Yet, behind those weary eyes was a life most would never imagine. Every night she balanced exhaustion with resolve, because her paycheck wasn't just for her, it was for her children, for the little apartment they called home, for keeping food on the table. Amara's life was built on invisibility. She moved silently through boardrooms where deals worth millions were scribbled onto contracts, wiping away fingerprints from desks that would host tomorrow's negotiations. She polished the floors until they gleamed, floors that would carry the footsteps of CEOs, investors, and foreign delegates by morning. And in those hours, she existed on the edge of sight, necessary but never acknowledged. It wasn't that she wanted recognition. She wanted fairness. Yet even fairness seemed elusive. She felt it in the way security guards watched her badge more closely than others, in the way executives passed her without a nod, though she often overheard their names spoken with reverence, in the way her daughter asked why Mommy always had to work at night when other moms didn't. Still, Amara pushed on. She taught her children that hard work mattered, even if the world didn't always reward it, and deep down she believed that doing what was right, no matter how small, had power. But she never expected that belief to be tested inside the very building she cleaned every night. That evening began like any other. The lobby was quiet, the air faintly scented with the lemon polish she carried. She tied her hair back, slipped on her gloves, and started her rounds. The city outside buzzed with late-night traffic, but in here the silence was thick, broken only by the soft hum of fluorescent lights. She moved from office to office, stacking chairs neatly, wiping away smudges from glass walls and emptying bins filled with crumpled papers that sometimes hinted at lives far more complicated than her own. Occasionally, she'd pause at the tall windows and look out over the city, wondering what it felt like to sit behind those desks instead of cleaning them. But that night, something was different. A small red light blinked on the sleek black phone in the corner of a conference room. At first, she ignored it. Phones weren't her concern. Yet, as she continued her work, the silence was suddenly cut through by a shrill ring. Startled, Amara froze. No one was supposed to be calling this late. The sound filled the room, sharp and urgent, bouncing against the glass walls. She looked around. Empty. No managers, no secretaries, no one else. Just her. The phone rang again. Her first instinct was to leave it. That wasn't her job. If anything, picking it up could get her in trouble. She knew her place, or at least she knew the place the world kept trying to force her into. And yet, something pulled at her. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe instinct, maybe the countless nights of being overlooked that made her feel she had nothing to lose. Amara stood still, her gloves clutched in one hand, her breathing shallow. The phone kept ringing. Each chime seemed Heavier, louder, almost daring her to act. She didn't know it yet, but that single decision, to answer or to walk away, would change everything. It would drag her from invisibility into the center of a storm that few people like her were ever allowed to enter. And in that storm, she would discover just how much one voice, one choice could matter, because this was no ordinary call. And the person on the other end wasn't just anyone. Amara's hand trembled as she reached for the receiver. She half expected the ringing to stop the moment she touched it, but it didn't. The shrill sound cut into her nerves until finally, she lifted it. On the other end, a voice spoke quickly, foreign, accented, urgent. She couldn't catch every word, but she recognized enough. A client, a deal, something about deadlines. Papers rustled in the background and the man's tone carried panic. Amara's heart pounded. She wanted to say, "I don't work here," but the words stuck. Instead, she listened, repeating the few details she understood back to him. Careful, steady, trying not to make a mistake. She wrote notes on a scrap of paper from the bin. A name, a company, a time difference. The man sounded relieved, as if someone had finally heard him, and just as suddenly as it began, the line went dead. Amara stood frozen, clutching the phone. That should have been it. Just an accident, a strange moment in an otherwise ordinary night. But the following morning, it wasn't ordinary anymore. By noon, whispers spread across the building. Executives stormed in and out of glass-walled offices, voices sharp and tense. A billion-dollar client from overseas had nearly pulled out of a deal because no one returned their call. The only thing that saved it was someone picking up. A cleaner. At first, Amara tried to stay invisible, as always. But invisibility doesn't hold when eyes are searching for blame. By mid-afternoon, 2 managers cornered her. Their tone wasn't gratitude, it was suspicion. Why were you near that phone? How did you even understand him? Are you sure you didn't interfere with something you shouldn't have? Each question was sharp, accusatory. Amara tried to explain. She was the only one there. The call wouldn't stop. The man sounded desperate. But instead of recognition, her words fueled more doubt. A cleaner had answered a call meant for executives, and in their eyes, that was a mistake. It didn't matter that she saved them from losing the client. What mattered was that she dared to step beyond her place. The weight of their stares pressed on her like shackles. She left that day with her stomach in knots, wondering if she'd still have a job tomorrow. And yet, something unexpected happened. That evening, while mopping the marble lobby, she overheard 2 junior staff whispering. The client overseas had praised the woman who answered, said she was calm, clear, and respectful. He wanted to know who she was. That praise should have shielded her, but instead it made her a threat. The next days blurred into tension-filled hours. Supervisors tracked her movements more closely. Her break times were questioned. Once she found her supply cart searched. And when she passed through the halls, conversations seemed to hush, followed by glances that sliced through her. Amara knew this feeling. The subtle sting of prejudice wasn't new. It had chased her through schools, through jobs, through grocery stores where she was followed by clerks who assumed her skin meant suspicion. But this felt sharper. Here, her small act of responsibility had cracked open a world that wanted her to stay invisible. And then came the meeting. She was called into a boardroom, its long polished table gleaming under fluorescent lights. Executives sat lined up like judges, their eyes cold. One spoke, his tone smooth but edged. They told her she had violated protocol, overstepped boundaries, that she should have let the call go unanswered. Her chest tightened. She tried to remind them. The client was saved, the deal was safe. But they dismissed her words with polite nods, the kind that carried no weight. To them, her action wasn't a rescue. It was an inconvenience. As she walked out of that room, she realized something terrifying. It didn't matter how right she was. It didn't matter that she helped. To them, her skin, her role, her status erased the value of what she'd done. That night, Amara scrubbed the same conference table where her worth had been debated like a nuisance. The irony burned. Her reflection stared back at her in the glass. Walls, tired eyes, clenched jaw, a woman carrying more strength than they would ever see. But just as she was ready to surrender to silence, a new twist arrived. A sealed envelope slid onto her cart by someone she never saw. Inside, a printed memo. The foreign client was flying in the next week, and written in bold across the top was a question that made her pulse race. Who was the woman who saved this deal? Amara's breath caught. Someone powerful wanted to meet her. And if the executives had buried her once, what would they do now, when the client himself demanded to see her face? The storm wasn't over. It was only beginning. The day of the client's arrival came with a tension so thick it seemed to press down on the entire building. Every corner gleamed, every table polished, every flower in the lobby arranged with surgical precision. It was the kind of preparation reserved for royalty. And yet, behind the glass doors and marble floors, something darker festered. Fear. Not for the deal, not for the client, but for the possibility that the truth about who had saved everything might finally surface. Amara felt it before she even stepped into the building. Security's gaze lingered on her longer than usual. Her supervisor's clipped tone made it clear. Stay invisible. Do your job. And nothing more. But invisibility had never felt heavier than it did now. She knew the client wanted to meet her. She knew her name was whispered in conversations where she wasn't welcome. And she knew, without a doubt, that those in power were preparing to erase her part in the story before it was ever told. The morning dragged with a suffocating stillness. Amara moved through the halls with her cart, each squeak of the wheels echoing like a warning. She heard footsteps rushing, phones buzzing, papers shuffling. And then, the moment. The foreign client arrived. Cameras flashed in the lobby. Executives swarmed, and greetings were exchanged with stiff politeness. From the far corner, Amara watched, unseen. The client was sharp-eyed, confident, his presence commanding attention. But what struck her most was that he didn't waste time on small talk. Within minutes, his voice carried through the lobby. I want to meet the woman who answered my call. The silence that followed was deafening. Executives shifted uncomfortably. Smiles faltered. The CEO himself, towering and immaculate, stepped forward, his jaw tight. Of course, he said smoothly. We'll arrange that. But his eyes burned with something else. Panic. Amara's chest tightened. She knew what was happening. They were scrambling for a lie, ready to present someone else in her place. A secretary, an assistant, anyone but the black cleaner who wasn't supposed to exist beyond the margins. And sure enough, minutes later, she saw it unfold. A neatly dressed junior staffer was ushered forward, introduced as the woman who had saved the deal. The executives smiled, confident in their performance. The cameras clicked, capturing a narrative carefully constructed to erase her. Amara stood, frozen, her mop in hand, her heart pounding. Rage and despair collided inside her. She wanted to scream, to expose the lie, to demand that someone, anyone, acknowledge her. But fear gripped her just as tightly. She knew what it meant for a black woman to challenge power in public. She knew the cost. And yet, across the lobby, the client's eyes narrowed. He studied the woman they presented, then glanced at the executives. Something didn't fit. His gaze drifted, sweeping the room until it landed on Amara. For a heartbeat. Time stopped. His expression shifted. Recognition. Certainty. He pointed, his voice cutting through the silence. Her. That's her. Every head turned. Dozens of eyes locked on Amara, standing there in her cleaning uniform, gloves still damp from work. For a moment, the world seemed to tilt. She felt naked under their stares. Exposed, vulnerable, terrified. The CEO's smile faltered, his face tightening. The room buzzed with unease. But the client stepped forward, unshaken. This is the woman who answered. She was calm, professional, and she saved our partnership. Why are you hiding her? The question sliced through the air like a blade. No one spoke. The polished image of power cracked, revealing the ugliness beneath, the desperate attempt to erase her worth because of who she was. Amara's throat ached with emotion. For the first time, she wasn't invisible. But the recognition came with danger, because in that room, the executives weren't just angry. They were cornered. And cornered power can be ruthless. The CEO's voice was tight, controlled. She's a cleaner. She doesn't understand the complexities of our work. We can't give credit where it doesn't belong. The words hit harder than any blow. Amara's body trembled, heat rising behind her eyes. She wanted to shrink, to disappear, but the client's sharp reply stopped her. Credit belongs where it is earned. Do you think I care about her title? She did what none of you did. She answered when it mattered. Gasps rippled through the room. Cameras captured every word. For Amara. The moment was overwhelming. It was vindication, but it was also terrifying. She could see the fury burning in the CEO's eyes, the unspoken threat that her life at this company was over. She could lose her job, her income, her stability, all because she had dared to be visible. But as she stood there, shoulders heavy with years of dismissal, something shifted deep inside. She realized that this moment wasn't just about her, paycheck, or even the client. It was about truth, about every time she had been overlooked, underestimated, and erased. About every time someone told her she didn't belong. Her voice shook, but it didn't break. I just did what was right. The room erupted, executives shouting, reporters scribbling, cameras flashing. The chaos was dizzying, but Amara felt a strange calm. The truth was out, undeniable. And yet, beneath the noise, one question thundered in her mind. Would this moment lift her or destroy her? The boardroom never fully quieted after that day. Whispers of Amara's name lingered in. Hallways carried in half-concealed tones and nervous glances. The client's insistence had forced the truth into the open. But truth alone did not erase the hostility of those who had tried so hard to bury it. In the weeks that followed, Amara's world changed, but not in the ways people might expect. She didn't suddenly become an executive. She wasn't promoted, applauded, or celebrated by the very company she had saved. If anything, the opposite happened. Shifts were reassigned. Extra scrutiny followed her every move. She could feel the weight of retaliation pressed into her shoulders, subtle but relentless. And yet, there was also something else, something powerful. Word of what had happened spread beyond the walls of that building. The client had told the story back home, sharing how a woman dismissed as a cleaner had saved $1 billion deal through courage and clarity. Journalists picked up fragments of the story. And slowly, a ripple formed. Amara began receiving quiet acknowledgments from strangers. A woman on the train whispered, "I heard what you did." A security guard, once cold, gave her a nod of respect. Even her children, too young to understand contracts and corporations, knew something had shifted. "Mom," her daughter asked one night, "why do they talk about you on the news?" Amara's throat tightened at the question. How could she explain? How could she put into words that the same world that erased her had, for one brief moment, been forced to see her? But here's the truth. Amara's story was never just about one phone call. It was about a system that would rather invent a lie than admit a black woman mattered. It was about the casual cruelty of erasure, the way racism doesn't always shout. It whispers, it rewrites, it denies. And it was about resilience. Amara kept her job, not because they wanted her, but because letting her go after the client's recognition would have been too obvious. Still, she walked into that building each night with her head held higher than before. She was no longer just invisible labor. She was proof of something the executives could never undo, that worth is not dictated by skin color or job title. But the impact reached far beyond her own life. Her story became a mirror for others. Janitors, cleaners, security guards, waiters, people who lived in the shadows of systems built to overlook them. They saw themselves in her. They felt the sting of being silenced and the quiet triumph of refusing to disappear. And for those who had never faced such erasure, her story forced a question they could no longer ignore. Why is it so hard to see people until they do something we can't deny? Amara herself wrestled with that question. Nights alone, scrubbing glass walls that reflected her tired face, she wondered why recognition had to come at such a cost. Why her humanity had only been acknowledged when a billionaire's money was on the line. Why justice still felt like survival, not triumph. The world loves to celebrate the exceptional, the one cleaner, the one underdog, the one overlooked worker who breaks through. But for Amara, the truth was bitter. She shouldn't have needed to be exceptional to be seen. She shouldn't have had to save a corporation from collapse to be treated with respect. Her worth was never conditional. And yet, that is the reality so many live. To be black, to be poor, to be overlooked. It means constantly carrying the weight of proof that you belong, proof that you matter, proof that your humanity cannot be denied. That is the deeper wound of racism. Not just the open hatred, but the quiet erasures. The moments when the world looks straight through you until it needs you. For Amara, the incident ended, but the impact never left. Her children grew up knowing their mother had stood in the face of a system that tried to silence her. Her community saw in her a reflection of their own resilience, and for every person who heard her story, there was one less excuse to pretend that invisibility is harmless. Because invisibility is harm. It strips dignity, it denies truth, and it leaves wounds that recognition alone cannot heal. Amara's story asks us to confront an uncomfortable reality. How many people do we pass by, dismiss, or overlook each day, simply because of the roles they play or the color of their skin? How many stories like hers are buried, rewritten, erased, until the world forces them into the light? And if it takes $1 billion deal for us to notice, what does that say about us? This wasn't just about Amara. It's about every worker who goes unseen, every voice silenced by prejudice, every life valued only when convenient. Her story is one thread in a much larger fabric of injustice, and it's up to us to decide whether we keep weaving the same pattern or finally tear it apart. So the question remains, how many more Amaras will be ignored before we finally see them?